BookTube and welcome to a new video. This is the 80s music book tag. I wasn't tagged because those who know me know that the 80s was a disastrous decade for music. We lost so many fine bands, and New Wave, which was, you know, an interesting music, sort of lost its way, and we had New Romanticism instead. So I've had to do a bit of genetic engineering on this, because each of the 8 prompts comes accompanied with an 80s rock ballad to sort of set up its prompt. And while I sort of respectfully observed them in the prompts, the musical intermissions do not respect them. Anyway, you'll see what I mean. I ought to say that this was originated by Spinelli Speaks and the book Bubbler, and I shall post links to both of their original videos. I'm afraid they're two booktubers I'm not familiar with. Okay, so the first one is prompted by Cyndi Lauper. It's her song True Colours.
1, 2, 3, the crew is called BDP. And if you want to go to the tip top, stop the violence in hip hop. Why-oh?
Name a book that represents the true you. I'm not sure I really have a book that represents the true me, even the books that I write myself. Is it asking for a character who sort of so closely mimics or follows your own character? I don't know. I don't have one. I will say that having read biographies of Franz Kafka, I think I identify with him as a person more than any other author or artist, for that matter, that I've come across. But it's not quite the same as being the true me. We did have similar attitudes towards our fathers, though, I will say that. 2, REO Speedwagon, Keep On Lovin You. What's your favourite book from the 1980s? Okay, so I'm going to do one fiction, one non-fiction. So the fiction, Paul Auster, the New York trilogy, which originally came out as the 3 books separately during the 80s, and they were put together in this trilogy edition in the late 80s, 88 I think it was. I didn't read them separately, I read them in this trilogy, not this one, but in the trilogy edition. This is one of the books that succumbed to my mould outburst and I had to throw away, but it's definitely one I wanted to reorder to keep in my collection. And what a fine work of sort of metaphysical detective fiction this is. So this was my favourite 80s fiction. And non-fiction, for some reason I don't have this. I wonder if this did also succumb to my mould outbreak. I don't know. I just went and looked for it, but I don't seem to have it anymore. Which is Stephen Hawking's A Brief History of Time. So I'm a writer. I would side myself as on the art side rather than the science side. I was very good at chemistry, as it happened, but I was completely hopeless at physics. So, which is a shame, because I actually have a great interest in physics, and the key moment in that came when, having sort of been sort of terrible at school, I picked up Hawking's A Brief History of Time because, you know, everyone was talking about it, and I tried to read it and I couldn't get anywhere with it. But then I picked it up again later, let's see, it would have been about 94, because I had a transatlantic flight for a friend's wedding in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and I read it again, and this time I got through it and most of it made sense, and I think that gave me the confidence to pick up other sort of popular science, particularly popular physics, on things like quantum physics and cosmology and things like that. Because, as I say, it's quite important to me in terms of what I write about, because I'm very interested in the different scales that we operate on. Obviously our daily lives are on a human scale, and our senses of perception are sort of set up to operate on that scale, but we have this great planetary scale, and then we have this tiny subatomic scale, and I like mixing them in my writing, but in order to do that I have to understand the physics. So it was really A Brief History of Time that sort of set me on my way to have the confidence to pick up science books again. 3, Aretha Franklin and George Michael. See, Aretha Franklin, great. George Michael in a duet. Anyway, what was the song called? Knew You Were Waiting. A book published in the 1980s that you still want to read.
Sisters, we don't need the matches grooving. Brothers, sisters, we don't need the matches grooving.
Well, I went through the list of novels published in the 80s, you know, US novels, UK novels, debut novels, and the ones I wanted to read in the 80s, I've read. And it suggests as poor a decade as it was musically. It wasn't much better in literature. But it does so happen that I am currently reading Don DeLillo's Libra, which was published in '88. So this would qualify. I'm about halfway through this. It won't be my favourite DeLillo. The reason that, you know, I'm a DeLillo completist, I've only got this and Rat in a Star to read everything to have read everything by him. And the reason I put this off so long is because I'd read Underworld as my first DeLillo and was blown away by that. And this covers a lot of the same ground, although it has a different lens on it, in that Underworld was much more sort of a wide lens on the whole of the culture, whereas this is much more specific on the individuals involved in the conspiracy. It's perfectly good, it's perfectly serviceable, but it's just not up there with DeLillo's greater works. And the only other novel I thought I might be tempted to read is John Kennedy O'Toole's A Confederacy of Dunces. I'm not sure whether I'll get round to reading that. I may not. I used to have a copy of it. I don't know if I still have it. It might have succumbed to the mould. And I think my dad bought me that copy. I didn't buy it for myself. Anyway, 4, Whitesnake, Here I Go Again.
Go nuclear, the cowboy told us. And who am I to disagree? 'Cause when the madman flicks a switch, the nuclear will go for me. The lunatics have taken over the asylum. The lunatics have taken over the asylum.
A book series or an author's new release that you're highly anticipating. Well, normally I would go straight for the new release. But actually, amazingly enough, given my take on series, this is part of a trilogy. It's David Peace's third in his Japanese trilogy. It's called Tokyo Redux, and it was supposed to have been released last week, but because of the COVID-19 pandemic, Peace himself has asked for it to be delayed because he's an author, because he spends half his time living in Japan and half living over here in the UK. He does a lot of promotional work around his novels when they're actually published, and obviously he can't do that in the present climate. So it's been put back a year, which is very aggravating. So he wrote the first two in the trilogy in 2008 and 2009, so we've had to wait 11 years already for this. But, you know, the wait will be worth it. 5, Dead or Alive, You Spin Me Round.
1987, all I wanna do is fly. All I want for you to do is reach up to the sky. Well, and calm down easy.
A book you would like, or a book you would like to or want to read again? Well, I don't do many rereads. I limit myself to 2 a year just because, you know, it would eat into reading new stuff. And I've already read my 2 for this year. But I know the 2 I'm going to reread next year. One is Haruki Murakami's Hard-Boiled Wonderland and the End of the World, which is easily my favourite one of his, because I'm not a huge Murakami fan, but this is fantastic. And I want to see how he has 2 narratives in 2 different genres running side by side in this book, and they don't seem to link up at all, but how he brings them together at the end is brilliant. And what I want to see is any of that laid down, you know, in advance, or is it completely from out of the blue? Because I was so shocked and surprised in a pleasant way by the ending. I hadn't my mind wasn't sort of able to track back and work it out. The other is William Burroughs, Cities of the Red Knight. For me, easily Burroughs' best book. I read this in the British Library many, many years ago. And in fact, as I get older, in my mid-50s, I want to read all three in this series, because the other two, The Place of Dead Roads and The Western Lands, are all about death. So I'm going to read all three of the trilogy, and I'm going to start with this. 6, Michael Jackson's Billie Jean.
List monitors are right with petition. I have this philosophy. Is your life worth the painting? Is this girl versus boy with different symbols? Being born is power. Scout leader, Nazi tag, this big scene. Your risk change me hostage. Me, I'm fighting with my head. I'm not ambiguous.
A book that was recommended to you that you really didn't like. Okay, well, I'm going to have fun with this because there are 2. The first was this year, Hurricane Season by Fernando Melchior from Mexico. Recommended by Eric Lonesome Reader, who really likes it. And I really respect Eric's opinion, but for once I diverge with him on this. And it's also long listed on the Man Booker International Prize. Yeah, I hated this. It was one tone, and that tone was shrill. Quite a few of these I've sort of got full in-depth reviews, and I'll post the links to them, including this. Yeah, there's just no light or shade in this whatsoever. And the other is Ghost Wall, Sarah Moss, which was a BookTube darling. Was it 2 years ago? And normally I would never go within a mile of this book because it's sort of has supernatural elements. But, I was told it was political, which it tries to be. And it was about post-Brexit, which it tries to be. But to my mind, and again, I'll post the link to this review, because basically I kept going, it's not even that it does this, it's not even that it does that. And then I never gave you the payoff. I mean, it was a combination of all of them, but I didn't actually in the video remember to tie it all together. So in some ways, not one of my better videos, but in other ways it was, because I was very snarky about it. But basically the politics in this book is just so dumb, and even more thrown into relief by the current crisis we're undergoing in globally about racism. This is just an idiotic, dumbed down, dumb take on trying to portray that, with cardboard characters. And it's one of the few books, live and let live, I say, we all have different reading tastes. So if someone's talking about a book I really didn't like, I'll just point out I didn't like it, but I won't go into any detail, I won't attack or defend my reasons why it's a bad book. But actually this book so provoked me that in every instance where I came across people praising it, I'm afraid I did respond. Not one of my finest hours, but once it's out there you have to stand by your opinion, and I do. 7, Van Halen, Jump.
The yellow sun was setting in Tombstone. The citizens are gone, but not today. By a freaking coin, the piano made it play, but only the wind and the dust heard it say. Do you believe in the West World?
A book that scared or surprised you? Well, books don't scare me. It's just words on a page. They're not going to come and even, penetrate my dream imagination at night. But I will say a couple that surprised me. The first is the work of Blake Butler, 300 Million, which is the story of a serial killer who is determined to kill every single American citizen, hence the title 300 Million. Deeply disturbing work. And Anatomy Courses, which is by Blake Butler and Sean Kilpatrick, which I really enjoyed. It's not as disturbing as this. It's rather marvellous in its sort of strange imagery. But Butler is a very discomforting author, and I'm glad to report he has a new book out imminently. I'm going to have to wait for it to come down in price, because I think at the moment it's only published in the US, so that makes it very expensive. But I can't wait, because I love Blake Butler's work. The other book that surprised me in a totally different way was this, Miriam T's Women Talking, which is a book about, first of all, it's historical fiction, No, sorry, it's not historical fiction, but it's about the Mennonite community, which kind of makes it historical because they're living 3 centuries behind everybody else in terms of their technology, and it's about religion. You know, it's women talking. Basically, they were all assaulted in their sleep, having been drugged by the men in their community, and they managed to sort of have this sort of secret meeting to decide what their response is going to be. Are they going to stay in the community and act as though nothing happened? It's, you know, that's what happens to women in Mennonite communities. Are they going to leave? Are they going, you know, what is their course of action going to be? And it was fantastic. You know, it wasn't the religion that particularly turned me on, but what I realised was it was a really interesting study on the difference between literal language, i.e. the language of the Bible, and interpreting that literally, with metaphorical language. And that seems to be where the women were sort of, you know, their arguments kept basically coming back to these points. Those are the women who interpreted what the other said very literally, and those other women who interpreted what the others said in much more sort of metaphorical terms. And it was a brilliant study of that. So I was so pleasantly surprised that, you know, despite the sort of unappealing setup, it was actually a wonderful, wonderful book. 8, Heart. What about love? Well, what about it?
Police in helicopter, I search for marijuana. Policemen in the streets, searching for cali weed. But if you continue to burn up the herbs, we gonna burn down the cane field. If you continue to burn up the herbs, we gonna burn down the cane.
What do you love about BookTube? The conversations that you have both on my videos and on other people's videos when I comment, and we, you know, it's just talking about books really, which is fantastic. But the bigger thing than that, even for me, is that I've been exposed to so many books I never would have heard of, and picked them up, read them, and, you know, I would say 20 to 25% of my annual read is made up of books recommended by other booktubers that I wasn't aware of, because I'm not plugged into any of these sort of publishers lists or anything where you find out about what's coming out. So BookTube renders that service to me, and of those books each year, I would say 80 to 85% of them are just, you know, hits with me. Very, very few of them, Ghost Wall not accepted, sort of fall flat. So I'm really grateful to BookTube for really widening my horizons, my reading horizons, because I have very specific tastes. I read a lot around the way I write and my view of literature, and it's through BookTube that I actually get exposed to other stuff. So yeah, I'm very grateful to BookTube for that. So there you have it. Thanks very much. Till next time.